Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 156 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where, well, the air is sometimes hot and stifling, but never foul.
Well, maybe. I don't know. Never seen that.
Hey, Dan, that's your problem, dude, not mine.
It's a good thing we're in separate booths, is all I'm saying.
Indeed it is.
Folks, go ahead and pull up a bench in the common room, and we'll be right there. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who once again finds himself muttering about not having any rope, Alan Sisto.
I knew I'd want it if I hadn't got it.
Let's just go buy you some rope, dude. I mean, we can go, we can just run to Home Depot. It won't take that long. We'll get you some rope. Let's go do that right now. While we're gone, we'll go to a pre-recorded segment.
Sounds good. Well, today we'd like to start the show with a guest. We're joined today by an artist whom Sean and I have both been fans of for a very long time. And if you're following Tolkien fandom and art online in any way, well, the chances are you are too.
Back in Season 2, one of our listeners asked us what some of our favorite works of Tolkien art were, and I named her picture Eärendil the Mariner as one of my favorites. No surprise there, I'm sure.
Well, it's Eärendil, right?
Exactly, yeah, you had me at Eärendil. Though I did mispronounce her name, so I want to make sure to correct that here, and I'm speaking, of course, of the prolific and award-winning artist Jenny Dolfen.
Exactly. And you know Jenny from her Tolkien art, which you can find online at her website and at her Etsy store, both of which we'll have links to in the show notes. Now, if you're a member of the Tolkien Society, you know her from there as well. She's won Tolkien Society awards for best artwork twice. In 2014 for Sean's previously mentioned favorite Eärendil the Mariner, and again in 2018 for The Hunt, which depicts Finrod, Maedhros, and Maglor riding in Beleriand.
She also painted The Professor, which was the artwork used in the official posters and T-shirts for Tolkien 2019, which I just happen to be wearing right now. I am not kidding.
Are you serious, Sean?
I am, yeah,
Wow.
just by accident. So if you have one of those amazing T-shirts, you have her to thank.
That's right. Well, we got a chance to talk to Jenny briefly when we attended Tolkien 2019 in Birmingham back in August, and we kept meaning to catch up with her for a quick live interview, but, well, she was really busy, and frankly, so were we.
It was just one of those times.
It
wasn't
was.
it, for
Yeah,
all
that
of
was
us?
a whirlwind.
But we have kept in touch, and just a few weeks ago, she let us know that she'd started listening to the Prancing Pony podcast. And she's even, we're proud to say, she's joined the ranks of the Fellowship of the Podcast, and we're so happy and appreciative to have her listening.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is it an honor to know that she's listening, but she's been a wonderful addition to our community so far. She's joined the conversation in the common room. She's been posting on some of our old episodes and even challenging some long-held assumptions, but we'll get to some of that in a minute.
True enough. So let's not put it off any longer. Jenny Dolfen, welcome to the Prancing Pony Podcast, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Really, it is our pleasure.
Well, thank you. And Jenny, we'd like to start, as we always do when we interview somebody, by getting to know you a little bit better. You know, anytime we have a guest on, we like to hear a little bit about their personal story about discovering Tolkien. So tell us, when and how did you first discover Tolkien's work? And maybe along the way, if you can also tell us a little bit about what your first steps were into illustrating Middle-earth as well.
Yeah, those two really went hand in hand. I got into Tolkien very early. It's the usual story. Whatever I've heard on your podcast, it's always the same. My mother reading it to me when I was 6, so I was really young.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that both of you said on the show that afterwards you asked, is there more? Or your kids, I think. I think your kids asked, is there more? And you said, nah, not yet. My mother didn't.
Oh, wow.
My mother had been a huge Tolkien fan for as long as I've been alive. So I think that she read The Lord of the Rings for the first time when I was born. And since then, she has been rereading the books every year, every autumn. As soon as the leaves turn golden, she turns to the books again.
Wow.
And when I was 6, she read The Hobbit to me, and I asked, is there more? And she said, yes. And she edited quite a lot. I was probably something like 7 by the time we started, and maybe 9 or 10 by the time we finished. So she would read some bits to me. Sometimes she would just summarize passages. And it would have been something like 2 years by the time we were done. But it was a wonderful experience. She was very clever that way, just closing the book at the most interesting bits and then leaving it lying for me to find and read on. And yeah, so I was very much an avid reader by the time we'd finished.
Yeah.
And the art happened straight away. I've always been somebody to pick up things that interested me, especially in books I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as something really fascinates me, I have to draw it. So the first Lord of the Rings art that I did, and I'm pretty sure it was the first one, was one of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, surrounded by the riders of Rohan. I only gave Eomer a horse because I couldn't be bothered to draw so many horses, but at least I drew all the Rohirrim with their lances pointing inward. And yeah, and it's quite apparent from the way that Legolas is the biggest in the whole picture that I just loved elves from the start. And I think that when we were done, I asked her, what is that huge brown book standing on your bookshelf? And all the Germans now know that I'm talking about the Silmarillion. And she said, oh, you wouldn't like that. It's just too old-fashioned, and it's not really like the Lord of the Rings. Don't bother. I believed her for a very long time. And I discovered and rediscovered the Lord of the Rings. Then I got into history. There was a 3-year spell when I was absolutely fascinated by Hannibal and the Punic Wars against Rome. I'd taken Latin at school at that time. So it was really always history and mythology for me. And I love these kind of things.
Wow.
And so the Silmarillion stood there on my mother's shelf, in German, of course, for quite a long time. And I picked it up when I was 17, and I needed a backdoor for that.
Yeah.
Because I was getting into role-playing, so I had met a couple of guys with whom I did the MERP RPG, so the Middle-earth role-playing.
Right.
And there was one player who kept dropping Tolkien lore that I'd never heard about, and that irked me to no end, that anybody should know more about Tolkien than I did. I'd ask him, where did you get that from? And he said, oh, that's all in the Silmarillion. So I said, okay. I went home, read the book pretty much cover to cover in a very short time. And I remember finishing it and thinking, this book has something to tell me.
Yeah.
And I didn't get it the first time around, but the next time around, I just got myself something to write and a piece of paper, and probably a lot of pieces of paper. And what I then did was actually reading through the Silmarillion once again and writing down summaries of everything that I found interesting, which was pretty much everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So I ended up with stacks of paper of stuff that I'd written down, summarized lists of the Valar, family trees of Finwë, and so on. And after that, I read the Silmarillion in English for the first time, and that was when I fell in love once and for all.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think the Silmarillion had a similar effect on me when I was a kid, and I was also a teenager. I think I was 15 or 16. And again, you don't get everything on the first pass, but you feel a depth there that keeps you coming back.
Absolutely, yeah. And this feeling of history that you get when you read it, that there's so much there, and you really want to do it justice.
Yeah.
So I had several more passes, and then, as I said, in English, because everyone who's tried to read the Silmarillion in German will know that if you think it's difficult in English, try the German version. Bone dry. It's really very, very cumbersome. And the translator did a great job capturing this ancient feeling of the Silmarillion. But most of the beauty got lost in the process.
Oh, I see.
That's unfortunate.
And discovering that beauty was really something that absolutely cemented my wishes for my later life to go on studying English, literature, and linguistics, and Latin as well, of course, because that was a given. But English joined that pretty soon.
That reminds me of a comment you made on one of our earlier episodes about how being a German language speaker helped you understand the Silmarillion in certain ways. I think this was going back to the old question we had about why rivers are called he.
Yeah.
And
yeah, probably.
as a person who's not a German speaker or a German reader at all, it's really interesting to me that, knowledge of other Germanic languages can really give us a different window into Tolkien, which can be very complex, but also very enlightening in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mostly in the Silmarillion, but also in the Lord of the Rings, especially in the later books.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of Germanic words where obviously Tolkien didn't want to pick the Romanic one.
Right.
A lot of these are probably quite alien to regular speakers of English.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these have German cognates, which I then already recognized, coming from a total family of word nerds. So word nerdery is really absolutely in my blood.
Good.
Both my parents studied German. My brother studied English and German. So there was a lot of thinking about words, about the history. My mother would just run for the dictionary to find out where this or that word was coming from, whether this was a cognate of that. So that was really how I grew up. And there was a lot of that in the Silmarillion. So I think that reading that in English for the first time wasn't as hard as I could have been reading a foreign language book.
Boy, that gives me so much hope for my kids because I'm doing that all the time. Anyway.
Well, Jenny, you are a prolific artist, to say the least, but I think I speak for all of us when I say that it's your work illustrating the first age, like you just talked about with the Silmarillion, that's most familiar to us. The Feanorians, the family of Tuor, and so on.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you spend more time as an artist in the first age? And if so, like you just talked about with your experience reading the Silmarillion, that seems like a pretty conscious choice. Is there something about those stories that draws you in a little bit more that you can identify?
Totally, yes. So I always loved the elves in The Lord of the Rings and also the Tralalali ones in The Hobbit. So when I discovered the Silmarillion, which was all about elves, so I didn't have to skip the next 20 pages to get the next thing said by an elf. That was quite nice. So it was really love at first sight, especially with all these elves. And picking a favorite was very, very fast. The very first Silmarillion picture I ever drew, and drawing a picture is usually the point where you could tell this is serious. So my very first picture of the Silmarillion was Fingon cutting off Maedhros's hand. So I really very early headed in for these two and their friendship, and maybe even the fact that Maedhros isn't quite as good as some of the other ones, but not quite as bad as some of still other ones, as we all know.
Right.
And what probably also added to that is the fact that, looking back, I talked about being a Hannibal fan, and Maedhros and Hannibal actually have a lot of parallels, which I didn't pick up while reading the Silmarillion, but here was a guy fighting a war because of an oath that had been put on him by his father, fighting a losing battle for a long period of his life, and being relocated to ever more obscure places in the end, and the end really getting very depressing. And I will admit, I love depressing stories. So that was some of the draw to Hannibal, and definitely a lot of the draw to Maedhros.
That's a fascinating connection. I don't think I'd really ever drawn this connection between those two, but you are absolutely right. So many similarities.
I think you couldn't pick that up unless you'd been a fan of both of these for years. And then I never drew the connection until much later either.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I feel mildly better about that then.
Well, I have to say, I mean, Jenny, your Maedhros is the Maedhros I see in my head when I read that book, and I think your Maglor as well. And as far as I'm concerned, those two are the good ones. Everybody has heard us talk about Feanor and his sons. Our opinions about Feanor and the Feanorians are well published.
The pinata.
The pinata. But really, the M's are the good ones, I always say. And I think, Maglor, I guess, is the one that sort of comes out in the end as sort of being the purist, I guess, if there is one. But Maedhros is somewhere in the middle, isn't he? He's maybe we've been a little bit too hard on him. Maybe we haven't given him quite enough credit in our first run through in the Silmarillion. But as I'm thinking about it, Alan, we just talked about that moment in Lord of the Rings where Elrond talks about the danger of an oath. And
Oh, right.
we talked about Mithras and Maglor and the fact that Elrond was fostered by them. And so
Yeah.
he would have seen firsthand the
Oh, I never
effects of that
realized
oath.
that.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, there's that
Oh,
moment,
yeah.
that moment that we just talked about in episode 150, I think it was, Alan.
Uh-huh.
About when Elrond and Gimli have the exchange about the value of an oath to strengthen
Right.
quaking heart.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And so Elrond would have seen firsthand the effect that this had on Mithras and Maglor, and certainly Mithras is an excellent cautionary tale for
Yeah.
that. So I want to go back
Absolutely.
and reread that story with that in mind, and I probably need to go and read up on my Hannibal again, because it's been a long time since
Maybe.
college when I
Well, I'll
when I
tell you,
studied
when
classics.
we revisit the Silmarillion in season, whatever it might be, 12 or whatever,
Yeah.
then that's something we'll have to do, catch up a little bit on our ancient history.
Yeah. So I may soften on Mithras a little bit. Not Feanor. I'll never soften on Feanor.
Well, no, I don't think I can ever soften on Feanor. I always admired Mithras, though, because he, when he was rescued and he kind of surrendered the kingship of the Noldor in exile.
Yeah.
I thought that was always a very admirable, noble thing to do. So he certainly went up a notch in my book on that.
Yes, he's very decent, and
Yeah.
I think that was what really struck me about him. And of course, you can't go and say he's absolutely pure. No, he's not.
No.
And that's one of the reasons why I find him so fascinating, and why I feel so much for him in the end, when everything just starts going downhill, and the war against Morgoth is lost. His friend is lost. So at the end of the Nirnaeth, he really has nothing left. His castle is lost, his alliance is lost, and his friend as well. And that is really where everything starts to fall apart. And you can tell he never really recovers. In little fits, maybe.
Yeah.
Like trying to save the sons of Dior, for example. But there's never really anything of the strong-willed and strong-hearted Feanorian that we see in the earlier course of the Silmarillion.
That's true. You're right. He did change drastically after that. So, Jenny, I want to talk a little bit about some of your books. In 2016, you published Songs of Sorrow and Hope, and that's a collection of over 50 illustrations inspired by Tolkien, Celtic mythology, and even Roman history, which, of course, we now know you're a humongous fan of it. You said on your website and here on the show that you've loved Roman history since you were young. And in 2014, you even published an illustrated novel about Rome called Darkness Over Kenai. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, that really was a bit of a rekindling of the old love. It came completely out of the blue. I have no idea where that came from. Suddenly, sometime in 2013, I started drawing Hannibal again. And I suddenly felt myself thinking, sorry, all my Tolkien friends, would you be terribly cross with me if I just left Tolkien for a year or two and started drawing nothing but elephants and generals for something like 18 months? And everybody said, you're not going to do that. And, well, I did. And, I went back to Hannibal as a character and for the place he holds in the rise of the Roman Empire, which he really helped birth, ironically, by trying to contain it. Because by the end of the Punic Wars, Rome suddenly had so much. And I don't think they bargained for that. So that's another thing that there's this huge tragic about somebody trying to do something they think is right and ending up achieving the complete opposite. So it's the Mithras effect again. I started reading some books on Hannibal that had come up in the 20 years since I'd last been a fan. And there was one book about the Battle of Cannae by Greg Daly, a wonderful British author. And I read that one and started wondering what must it have felt like standing on that battlefield, not just for Hannibal, but for the Romans, thinking that they couldn't possibly lose this. And suddenly to realize, this is it, we're done. That's absolutely the worst possible outcome of this battle. Then I started writing the story first, and just looking at seven different characters on this battlefield, 4 Carthaginian and 3 Roman. And of course, pretty soon I realized I want to make a book of this. And of course, I want to make it an illustrated book. And I approached some publishers and told them about this idea, and everybody basically just said, "You're bonkers." Yeah, so basically a picture book with 60,000 dead. No, you can't do this.
Wow.
So I said, okay, maybe not the traditional way, and I went the self-publishing way then, and I had a Kickstarter, or rather Indiegogo it was back then, and it was quite successful. I think I overshot my goal by something like 600% or so. So it was really, really, really successful. I spent pretty much a year writing and mostly drawing these pictures, finding somebody who could do the layout, and then self-publishing that, shipping 300 books from my home, enlisting the children to help me pack.
Yeah.
Well, is that still available, and where can our listeners get that if they're interested? Because that sounds like something that many of them would like.
Yeah, it was picked up by an American publisher 2 years ago, but I haven't really heard about the project since. I suppose it is somehow still around, and it's going to be reprinted from an actual publisher this time that does military history and these sorts of things. But for the time being, I'm sold out of them, and of course I haven't really got any new ones because I thought there's going to be a new edition. But you can get it as a quite cheap PDF in my Etsy shop.
Oh, okay.
So if you're interested, there's the PDF.
Excellent. We'll make sure we have a link up to that on the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
And Jenny, I understand you've also got a new art book out now as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I put together a new art book that came out last autumn called Journeys, where I go a bit more personal with my own personal artist journey, not just talking about the pictures, but also about what went into them as an artist, and some of the difficulties I was facing with the loss of my brother and an eye sickness that I picked up 2 years ago now. And that really has been proven a big challenge to do art. But then picking up art again and really taking you through that journey of rediscovering art, and loads of Silmarillion pictures as well.
Well, I'm looking at the cover of it right now, and it's got one of my favorite pieces of yours when Tuor comes to. Oh, man, that's one of the ones I actually bought in Birmingham. It's such a powerful piece.
Yeah, that's right. It's still one of the ones that I really love. It's a little shout out to John Garth at this point, because it was very much inspired by Tolkien and the Great War.
Yeah.
I was listening to that a year ago, and he was narrating the bit where Tuor comes at last to the sea after years of hardship, and just spreads out his arms and embraces this feeling of arriving and the sea and everything. I couldn't help but thinking about Cornwall when I read that. And John later told me it was probably what Tolkien had in mind, because there were some Cornwall impressions fresh on his mind when he was writing that scene. That was doubly fitting then, even if I didn't know it then.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
That is great.
And it was a great cover for a book called Journeys.
Yeah. Boy, you're not kidding. That's true. Absolutely perfect for that. Well, before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you one more quick question. Give us your favorite 3 characters from Tolkien that you like to depict. Can I guess one of them? I think one of them might be Mithras.
Try. Yeah, of course, yeah.
So with that said, who are the other 2 that you would put in your top 3 of favorite ones you like to depict?
It's difficult, really. Most of them would have to do with Mithras, I'm afraid. So the people that Mithras, in whose company he's usually found, which would be Fingon and Maglor. And again, not just because he's often found in their company. I mean, that could also be his father. And I haven't been quite that fond of him since I was 17 and was more in love with rebels than I am now. But Fingon and Maglor are really such wonderful characters in their own right. And this is something that fascinates me all the time when I get to talk to other Silmarillion fans, that there is so little on these characters.
Right.
And yet everybody sees them in the same way. And once you start talking about them, everybody will agree in saying, yes, of course, I saw him exactly like this. And that's exactly what he would do in that situation, or how he would look in that situation when they see these characters in my pictures. And that's such a wonderful thing to realize, that with so little written about these characters, and these sentences are so rich with meaning that everybody gets the same stuff out of them. I think that's amazing.
The efficiency of words that Tolkien, I mean, he was a master at that. No matter how long the works were, he could do more with fewer words than anybody else.
Absolutely.
And I think to be able to write something that's so sweeping in its mythic scope as the Silmarillion, and yet be able to get so much actual human drama out of
individual detail,
out of every story. And so these characters really do leap off the page as real people, even though they are viewed from this 30,000-foot level on this mythic scale. It's truly amazing.
And then it's thanks to art like yours that we're able to really even envision that as well as we do. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And we just want to thank you again, Jenny, for joining us here today. We're so happy to have been able to have you. And we're thrilled that you're actually listening to the Prancing Pony podcast and supporting us. So thank you so much for all of that.
Absolutely. It's great fun. And I love what you're doing, guys. So just keep it up.
Thank you. Oh, man, that warms our hearts.
Thank you so much. It really does. And listeners, you can find Jenny's art online at her website, gold7.wordpress.com. You can also buy it online at her Etsy shop. That's etsy.com/shop/Jenny Dolfen Art. That's JennyDolfenArt, all one word.
That's right. And you can even join us in supporting Jenny on Patreon at patreon.com/Jenny Dolfen.
And at the risk of repeating ourselves one last time, thank you so much, Jenny, for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
And with that, we'll return you to the podcast in progress.
Well, folks, we are back from Home Depot. We've got Alan his rope, and I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jenny. That was so much fun.
Oh, it was.
And thank you, Jenny, once again for being on the show. Folks, we have already been talking about getting her back on for a full episode interview as soon as we can.
Definitely. And now let's get back to the book, because we're all about the books here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Yeah, we bring you other Tolkien stuff from time to time, but at heart, Alan and I are fans of Tolkien's books and books about Tolkien. That's our passion.
Yes, it is. And as you know, we read a lot of books in preparation for the show every week. And if you'd like to get your hands on a book that we've mentioned, well, you're going to want to check out the official library page of our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. There we have links to every book we've mentioned on the show.
And there's a lot of other stuff on our website, too. There's show notes and book links specific to each episode. There's outtakes, there's Prancing Pony Ponderings, and there's some other little extras. You'll also find a link to our new online storefront at teespring.com/stores/PPP, where you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, and other Prancing Pony Podcast gear. So please be sure to check that out.
Definitely. And now let's join the company deep in Moria and hope that we aren't bewildered beyond hope of remembering. So we'll
no different than usual, I guess.
I know, that's exactly. I'm usually bewildered beyond hope of remembering. So good luck tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up where we left off last time. This is right as Gandalf explained how long of a march it's going to be.
Okay.
After only a brief rest, they started on their way again. All were eager to get the journey over as quickly as possible, and were willing, tired as they were, to go on marching still for several hours. Gandalf walked in front as before. In his left hand he held up his glimmering staff, the light of which just showed the ground before his feet. In his right he held his sword Glamdring. Behind him came Gimli, his eyes glinting in the dim light as he turned his head from side to side. Behind the dwarf walked Frodo, and he had drawn the short sword Sting. No gleam came from the blades of Sting or of Glamdring, and that was some comfort, for being the work of elvish smiths in the elder days, these swords shone with a cold light if any orcs were near at hand. Behind Frodo went Sam, and after him Legolas, and the young hobbits, and Boromir. In the dark, at the rear, grim and silent, walked Aragorn. The passage twisted round a few turns, and then began to descend. It went steadily down for a long while before it became level once again. The air grew hot and stifling, but it was not foul, and at times they felt currents of cooler air upon their faces, issuing from half-guessed openings in the walls. There were many of these. In the pale ray of the wizard's staff, Frodo caught glimpses of stairs and arches, and of other passages and tunnels, sloping up or running steeply down or opening blankly dark on either side. It was bewildering beyond hope of remembering.
Well, that's why your booth is foul, because you don't have any currents of cooler air.
I know, I was thinking the same thing, how much I would love to have half-guessed openings in the walls, but then the sound wouldn't be as good.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there is that. So let's go ahead and get back to the beginning of the passage and take a look.
Yeah. So, they're eager to get moving, aren't they? Everybody's
really
in a
are.
hurry.
Yeah, nobody wants
mean,
to spend
they're
more
tired.
time here than is necessary.
No, that's absolutely right. They're tired, but they're willing to keep going for several hours.
Yeah, this is not, let's stay here and camp out because it's such a charming,
No.
beautiful place to spend time.
Keep moving, people. Let's get out of here
Exactly.
as quickly as we can.
Now, Gandalf doesn't have his staff fully lit. Apparently, this is on some sort of low setting because it only shows the ground just in front of him. So it's pretty dim light, really. I would imagine that at the very back, it's almost impossible to see anything from the light.
That's right. And we notice that we don't have any other light coming from a couple of the weapons they're holding, right?
Right.
Gandalf is carrying Glomdring.
Mm-hmm.
Frodo is carrying Sting, even though if he loves it, he should set it free. And
every move he makes, man.
and they're comforted to see that no gleam is coming from those blades because, well, remember, these are swords made in Gondolin in the Elder Days, and so we know that they glow blue.
For the Goblin Wars, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yep. I also thought it was interesting that Tolkien takes great pains to give us the exact order of the party. So it's Gandalf, then Gimli, Frodo, then Sam, Legolas, Merry and Pippin, or Pippin and Merry, that's the only detail we don't have, then Boromir, and then Aragorn. But I think the thing is, as any DM worth their salt will tell you, you have to know what order your party is in when you're exploring a dungeon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you need to know who's bringing up the rear because the tentacled monster that might grab you suddenly.
Aragorn, roll a d20.
Yeah.
Wait, why am I rolling? Just roll, man. Just roll.
Just roll. I'll tell you in a minute.
Yeah. Gandalf, roll your perception check. All right. Anyway.
Yeah. So what do we get? We get some twists and turns in the passage.
Of course.
And then it begins to descend.
Right.
Descends for a little while and then becomes level again.
Mm-hmm. The air changes, though.
The air does change. It grows hot and stifling, not foul. I'm not going to make one more joke about it.
Well, of course you can. You can make as many jokes as you want.
Well, the other thing, aside from my booth, I think of it, this feels like a motel room to me. You know, like it's air is stifling, but it's not foul. Kind of like you might say of a motel room. It's like, well, it's, you know, it's not comfortable, but it's clean.
Yeah.
Or it's not big, but it's clean. You know.
Yeah, I wouldn't spend any extra time here, but it'll do the job while I'm on this road trip. Yeah.
Exactly. It's kind of it's very slight praise for the change in the air. Frodo is catching glimpses of stairs and arches, passages and tunnels. So
I'm kind of curious about that just in how he's able to see it, because if the light is so dim that it can only show the ground before his feet, how is Frodo catching sight of these things?
Maybe he's seeing darker spots in the ground. Maybe he's seeing dark lines that indicate openings instead of wall. I don't know.
Maybe the pale ray of the wizard's staff. So he is seeing it in the light of the wizard's staff. We'll find out later. I say that because later we'll find out that Frodo is gaining more.
Oh, that's right. We do see that Frodo has a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. He's got some senses here.
Yeah, he might even be developing infravision. Anyway.
Ooh.
Speaking of infravision, Gimli.
Well, I before we get on to that, I just want to point out that, I mean, he is seeing these various openings in the walls. This is a much more labyrinthine place than we're seeing here. They're walking in a straight line, but at least right now, this is not a straight path. This is a path with lots of places that are branching off, rooms branching off,
stairs, arches, passages, tunnels, up, down. It is, as they describe at the very end, as Tolkien says at the very end, it is bewildering beyond hope of remembering.
Mm-hmm.
If he got separated, he could not possibly find his way anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're thinking any one of these openings might be the path I should take.
Right.
And bewildering is kind of an understatement.
We need a Gollum GPS.
Yeah. You would need a Gollum GPS.
Yeah.
There you go.
But speaking of people who aren't of any help, even Gimli, you know, even though he's a dwarf, I mean, okay, we don't read this, but he's not of any harm. He is courageous. He's not troubled by the dark, but he's not of any sort of practical help. He doesn't necessarily know how to navigate here. Mm-hmm. As the text says, these are vast and intricate beyond the imagination of Gimli.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's saying something for a dwarf.
Well, I think it's a sign of decline. We get this
maybe,
theme of
yeah.
decline
Absolutely.
throughout Middle-earth, and Moria,
is ancient.
very, very old place. This is Aeld Ente Yawerk for dwarves. It's not something that he can really comprehend.
That's a great way of putting it, yeah. As we'll see later in the song that we'll get to it's not this episode, it's the next episode.
It's the next episode when we get the song of Durin and the Mirror.
This is a place of legend. Yeah, this is a place of legend for Gimli, yeah. So he certainly doesn't know it.
Yep.
And even Gandalf's previous visit is really of virtually no help at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, this strip mall wasn't here the last time he was here. And there's like this big gas station.
And
right
that
here
used to
by the
be an
side of the road.
Applebee's, and I don't even know what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember. I haven't been here in years, guys. I'm sorry. I don't even know if that diner's any good anymore, so.
And that was just a hill before. Now
help.
it's like a whole housing tract. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, as the text says, the far-off memories of a journey long before were now of little help. And basically, he just kept going in the direction that he knew he wanted to go, even if he didn't know the path itself. In other words, he knew he wanted to go east, so he just stuck to east, even if the path was winding. He just kept on wanting to go forward in that right direction.
Yep.
So those twists and turns, that confusion can cause a little bit of anxiety. And Aragorn has something to say here. Sean, I'm going to have you read that for us.
Aragorn has some words of encouragement here, and they're fluffier than you might expect. Do not be afraid, said Aragorn. There was a pause longer than usual, and Gandalf and Gimli were whispering together. The others were crowded behind, waiting anxiously. Do not be afraid. I have been with him on many a journey, if never on one so dark, and there are tales in Rivendell of greater deeds of his than any that I have seen. He will not go astray, if there is any path to find. He has led us in here against our fears, but he will lead us out again, at whatever cost to himself. He is surer of finding the way home in a blind night than the cats of Queen Beruthiel.
Oh, what's that I smell? I smell a sidebar. But we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Sidebar.
We'll get there in a
smells like
moment.
Victory. I love the smell of a sidebar in the evening. Gandalf and Gimli are whispering. Everybody else is a little bit nervous, like, why are the two leaders whispering? Do they not know where they're going? Do they not know where they're going? They don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're going. We're lost. We're going to die.
What? They don't know where they're going? They don't know where they're going. Yeah.
So Aragorn reassures them, and I love this. He says, look, in Rivendell, there are stories, man. There are stories in Rivendell of things I've never even seen him do. He's done some incredible things. He is not going to go astray if a path exists.
I feel like there's a potential Chuck Norris thing here with Gandalf.
Yes, there is.
Stories about the things he's done.
Oh, my goodness. That is awesome. I wish I could think of one off the top of my head, but yes.
I know, me
There's
too.
definitely a Chuck Norris vibe to that line, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
Oh, it's a shame.
He once roundhouse kicked a Balrog into a, I don't know. I got nothing.
I got nothing either, man. It's late. But just the idea, and you know what'll happen, right? We leave that in the episode, and our listeners are going to come up
Somebody
with
will come up with 30 of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're going to get like the top 10 moments.
Yeah.
The Chuck Norris
Gandalf,
moments
Chuck
of
Norris
Gandalf.
facts.
Right. It's going to be a great meme war of 2020. All right.
Yep.
But Aragorn's point is like, look, if there is a path, if there is a way, he will find it. This is Gandalf. He is going to find the way out.
And then right in the midst of this very encouraging thing he's saying, he comes out with something a little bit dark and foreboding, doesn't he?
Oh, yes, he does.
He will lead us out again at whatever cost to himself. There's definitely some foreshadowing here.
Yeah,
Again, this is not the first time.
Foreshadowing on this one.
This is Aragorn's I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time, and I'm
pretty sure it's not the last.
It's not the last time, I think
so.
Yeah. And then, and then we get one of the greatest textual ruins of all time, don't we?
I love it.
The cats of Queen Beruthiel.
Yep.
So yes, we do smell a sidebar. Smells a little bit like cat food.
Well, it's better than smell like a litter box, I guess.
That's right. That's right. It might be making some of you sneeze.
There you go.
But hey,
my eyes are red and itchy now, but let's do this.
That's right. All right. Well, we usually start in the letters when it comes to something like this.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we actually do find a couple of references in there. In letter number 163 to W.H. Auden, which was written in 1955, Tolkien answers several questions. Now, the letter as a whole is fascinating, and we have talked about it before. For example, that's the one in which Tolkien confesses that he had never been to Bree, and that Strider was a shock, that the mines of Moria were a mere name, and so on.
Yeah.
But as for the cats, Tolkien says, I have yet to discover anything about the cats of Queen Beruthio.
Mm-hmm. And then there's letter number 174 to Lord Halsbury, also written in 1955. In this one, Tolkien says, I don't think that anything is referred to in The Lord of the Rings which does not actually exist in legends written before it was begun, or at least belonging to an earlier period, except only the cats of Queen Beruthiel.
And then finally, in letter number 180, that's a 1956 draft to a reader who's identified only as Mr. Thompson, Tolkien says that there is hardly any reference in The Lord of the Rings to things that do not actually exist on its own plane of secondary or subcreational reality. That is to say, have been written.
Mm-hmm.
But in a footnote to that line, we learn the things that Tolkien recalls as not having been written. The cats of Queen Beruthiel and the names and adventures of the other two wizards, 5 minus Saruman, Gandalf, Radagast, are all that I recollect.
There you go. But in a footnote to the chapter on the Astari in Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien tells us that even the story of Queen Beruthiel does exist, however, if only in a very primitive outline, in one part illegible. He goes on to tell us that she was the nefarious, solitary, and loveless wife of Taranon, 12th king of Gondor, third age 830 to 913, and first of the Ship Kings, who took the crown in the name of Falastur, Lord of the Coasts, and was the first childless king. Well, I suppose if his wife's loveless, there's probably no surprise that he's also childless.
Probably. Yeah.
He goes on to say, Beruthiel lived in the king's house in Osgiliath, hating the sounds and smells of the sea, and the house that Taranon built below Pelargir, upon arches whose feet stood deep in the wide waters of Ethir Anduin. She hated all making, all colors and elaborate adornment, wearing only black and silver and living in bare chambers, and the gardens of the house in Osgiliath were filled with tormented sculptures beneath cypresses and yews. I'll add, by the way, as an aside, she sounds absolutely charming. I don't know what his problem is with her.
She sounds.
Wow.
She really does sound like a delight.
She's a winner, dude.
I know.
How did you get her? Whoa. I mean, the only thing she's got going for is the fact that she wears black and silver, but the Raiders weren't around yet, so she doesn't have that in her favor, really. Boom.
Of course, you had to get the Raiders reference in there.
I had to, but I also had to defend the Raiders and say, like, she's clearly not.
She would never be a Raiders fan.
No,
right?
She would not fit into the black hole at all. She would not. No. All right. She had 9 black cats. I should point out that I'm going back now to Tolkien's words, Christopher Tolkien's words, not mine.
Please.
She had 9 black cats and 1 white, her slaves, with whom she conversed or read their memories.
Hang on a second. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can she really enslave 10 cats? Like, can any human have that much control over their cats?
That's true. I think
Especially
it's
if you
probably
get
pretty
10 of
hard to
them.
enslave 1, let alone 10.
Right. I mean, I can't even get one of my 2 cats to stop sitting on the top of the couch and leaving a big imprint of her bottom in it.
We will see that the white cat seems to be key. So maybe she's enslaved that one and given it like power over the others, it seems. I don't know.
Maybe so.
Well, but you make a point.
We'll find out. Maybe there's something at work here.
Maybe Gondorian cats can be enslaved. I don't know.
Maybe so.
Anyway, so let's go ahead and continue.
Maybe I should get some of them.
So she apparently conversed or read their memories, setting them to discover all the dark secrets of Gondor, so that she knew those things that men wish most to keep hidden. And I'm just going to leave that right there. Setting the white cat to spy upon the black and tormenting them. Man, she's really a winner, isn't she?
Wow, she really is just, she's just a class act all around.
I hope she has a sister. Anyway, no man in Gondor dared touch them, the cats, that is. All were afraid of them and cursed when they saw them pass. What follows is almost wholly illegible in the unique manuscript, except for the ending, which states that her name was erased from the Book of the Kings, quote, but the memory of men is not wholly shut in books, and the cats of Queen Beruthiel never passed wholly out of men's speech. And that King Taranon had her set on a ship alone with her cats and set adrift on the sea before a north wind. He'd finally had enough, man. The ship
finally had enough.
The ship was last seen flying past Umbar under a sickle moon with a cat at the masthead and another as a figurehead on the prow. You can see him now, right? You like your cats today much? You're out of here with your cats on a boat with a cat.
That's a great image.
Isn't it?
That's a great image. And I can totally see King Tyrannon at the bar with his friends later. Like, so, all his friends are like,
I finally did it,
man. So, man, what was it that finally did it? It's, oh, Will. She found the things that I wished most to keep hidden.
Exactly. And I was like, that's it, man. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm done.
I told them to make
But
me
she
a
has a
boat
sister, so,
She... who's just as charming as she was. Well, still is. I don't know that she's dead. She's just abandoned on a boat with no food, just cats.
Sent out under a sickle moon. Which just sounds like,
oh man,
poetic.
It does.
For some reason.
This is real justice there, man. That is a great passage, and it's one of those things. Again, as we record this, we're only a few days after the passing of Christopher Tolkien, and this passage just reminds me of how grateful we are, as we are every episode, for the work that Christopher Tolkien did. But this is just phenomenal. It is.
To have access to this stuff. I mean,
yeah. Queen Baruthiel, a tale that we never would have known as anything other than textual ruins that even Tolkien himself claimed were textual ruins. Christopher Tolkien was able to dig up some a primitive outline.
I mean, you stop and think about that for a moment. I mean, we've come across a couple of these things before where Tolkien remembers things a certain way, usually because he's writing a letter 20 years later or something like that.
So many years
And then
later.
Christopher is able to go back to the original documents and say, my father didn't remember this correctly. And he corrects it a little bit. To be able to have a better record of the creation of this world, the subcreation of this world, than the author himself remembered. That is such a gift.
Breathtaking in its scope, isn't it?
It is, and it's. I think it must be unparalleled among writers.
Absolutely.
I don't know of another writer that we have this kind of insight into his artistic process and have this much supplementary information, and the fact that we owe it all to Christopher. Yeah. I'm going to get emotional again.
I know. Every time now. I mean, it's yeah.
It's just such a gift to us, and I am so appreciative to Christopher for doing this for us.
Me too. Me too.
This one is a fun one, and it's a really deep cut, and it's a really strong reminder.
This is definitely a B-side for sure, but it's a great one.
Totally.
And, it may make us laugh, this whole idea of this really just unpleasant woman and her being sent off, cast alone on a ship.
Sent on a boat with
awesome.
Her cats.
The king is like, I am done. I am just done with you. You're gone. She's out of there. She's the crazy cat lady on the boat by herself with the cats.
Well, I have something to say about that, though.
I know you do, because you're a cat guy.
But first, I want to say just the beauty of get the blank out of here and take your cats with you.
Seriously.
It really makes me happy. But
it does.
About her being a cat lady, I think we've got a little bit more on that.
Yeah, we do.
Because just when you think we've plumbed the depths and we've gotten as much out of Queen Baruthiel as we can,
there you go.
Hammond and Skull actually bring us this other lovely bit that comes from an interview that Tolkien gave to New Worlds in 1966. Tolkien said, "I don't really know anything certain about Baruthiel, though oddly enough, I have the notion that she was the wife of one of the ship kings of Pelargir." Okay, that's consistent so far.
Right.
She loathed the smell of the sea and fish and the gulls.
Yeah, again, just like Christopher tells us,
And after referencing a Norse myth, and I think we'll have to talk about that myth about Skadi in the postscript for this episode.
Ooh, yeah.
Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be.
After talking a little bit about that, he says that Baruthiel went back to live in the inland city and went to the bad, or returned to it. She was a black Númenórean in origin, I guess. And that's all Tolkien's words.
Right.
She was one of those people who loathe cats, but cats will jump on them and follow them about. You know how sometimes they pursue people who hate them, which I think
that means that happened
when you came over to my house, didn't it?
Right, exactly. That is what happened. You're right. Your cat kept chasing after me. And like, I'm allergic to you. Get away, get away. But you know, Tolkien said that.
You seem nice. I love you. And you're like, dude, stop. I'm going to sneeze.
Don't get next to me. I'm going to be in my eyes. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight.
Yeah.
And you can imagine Tolkien is saying this because you know what happened to him, huh? I mean, the cats are the fauna of Mordor. He clearly,
I don't
Tevildo, not good,
I
Huon,
don't think
good.
Yeah, but he also wrote some other nice poems
That's
about
true.
cats too.
And it's only specifically Siamese cats that are the fauna of Mordor. If
the
we're
fauna
gonna
of
be
Mordor
honest.
were Siamese cats. You're
Right.
right. But he wrote that Grimmelkin poem in one of his letters, and
Right.
he did write. There's another poem, I think, in Adventures of Tom Bombadil, isn't there, about a cat?
I think you're right.
So
yeah.
So there's a few things out there. I don't think he hated cats as much as he liked to say he did.
Well, it's kind of like
But
me. I may
maybe I'm just trying to
on
get him
but
back on my side. I don't know.
There you go. Maybe Tevildo.
So yeah, back to Queen Beruthiel and how she hated cats, but they pursued her anyway. Tolkien says, I'm afraid she took to torturing them for her amusement, but she kept some and used them, trained them to go on evil errands by night, to spy on her enemies or to terrify them.
Ooh.
So I don't know. She really wasn't a cat lady.
No, you're right.
Not in the sense that she liked cats. I mean, she had a bunch of them, but she didn't like them. She abused them, and
then used
forced them to do her dirty
She
work.
weaponized them, right?
She weaponized cats, man.
Now she's stuck on the boat with the cats who are looking at her like,
Yeah.
I don't see any mice. I don't see any fish. I don't see any birds, but I see you. We can eat you.
Isn't that the perfect poetic punishment for this?
Yeah, exactly. It really
because she hated these cats and she
now
gets
she's
sent
stuck
off
with them forever
on a boat with them.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Love
And that was a sidebar.
Boy, wasn't it? That might be one of my favorite sidebars in a long time. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, now where were we? That's right. We were in the mines of Moria, and Gandalf's trying to lead the way. So, as scared as they might be, it really is a good thing they've got Gandalf and his little portable light source, because they left a lot behind at the doors, right? At the desperate scramble at the doors, many things have been left behind because tentacles.
That'll do it every time.
Every time. They left their flashlights at the front gate. So, yeah, it's a good thing they've got Gandalf here.
And they need to have a light source because not only do they need it to help them choose between different roads, but there's also holes and pits and wells and things like that they could fall into if they can't see them. So, light is really
very important,
really crucial right now.
It would be nice if they had more than the one, since there are 9 of them, but this will do.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Sam doesn't just need light. He needs rope. There's a point where they get to a crack that's more than 7 feet across, and that's a pretty big jump for a little guy like Pippin. He makes it across, and Sam's like, man, rope. I knew I'd want it if I hadn't got it.
Now we've got some, so he can borrow ours.
That's right. There are times when it's helpful to have some rope,
Yep.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pick up right at that point.
All right.
As these dangers became more frequent, their march became slower. Already they seemed to have been tramping on, endlessly to the mountain's roots. They were more than weary, and yet there seemed no comfort in the thought of halting anywhere. Frodo's spirits had risen for a while after his escape, and after food and a draught of the cordial. But now a deep uneasiness, growing to dread, crept over him again. Though he had been healed in Rivendell of the knife stroke, that grim wound had not been without effect. His senses were sharper and more aware of things that could not be seen. One sign of change that he soon had noticed was that he could see more in the dark than any of his companions, save perhaps Gandalf. And he was, in any case, the bearer of the ring. It hung upon its chain against his breast, and at whiles it seemed a heavy weight. He felt the certainty of evil ahead, and of evil following, but he said nothing. He gripped tighter on the hilt of his sword and went on doggedly. The company behind him spoke seldom, and then only in hurried whispers. There was no sound but the sound of their own feet, the dull stump of Gimli's dwarf boots, the heavy tread of Boromir, the light step of Legolas, the soft, scarce-heard patter of hobbit feet, and in the rear, the slow, firm footfalls of Aragorn with his long stride. When they halted for a moment, they heard nothing at all, unless it were occasionally a faint trickle and drip of unseen water. Yet Frodo began to hear, or to imagine that he heard, something else, like the faint fall of soft, bare feet. It was never loud enough or near enough for him to feel certain that he heard it. But once it had started, it never stopped while the company was moving. But it was not an echo, for when they halted, it pattered on for a little all by itself, and then grew still. that's not creepy at all. At all, really. In a pitch black,
no, not at all.
Cavernous complex that you don't know where you're going or where you've been, to hear footsteps following you.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah.
I love this whole last paragraph. I want to talk about it. But first, we're going to have to go back and talk about the first paragraph you read.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
It seems as though they're going to the very roots of the mountain, aren't they?
Yeah. Endlessly to the mountain's roots.
Endlessly to the mountain's roots is what it tells us.
This just keeps on going. The road never seems to end is kind of what the sense we're getting here. This is
it's like deep, unfathomably deep into the ground.
This is like one of those endless runners on your phone. You just, no matter how far you get, you never get to the end.
Yep.
So yeah, indeed, they are headed to the roots of the mountain, but as tired as they are, they're going to keep on going because stopping just isn't very comforting. The idea of stopping here in this pitch black where they don't know where they are, where they don't know what's around them, just keep going. No matter how tired you are, really, the alternative is to stop, and I don't want to do that either.
Yeah. And we really see the effect that this has on Frodo. We see he was doing all right for a little while.
Yeah, food, a little bit of brandy, he's doing all right.
He was doing all right, but now a deep uneasiness, growing to dread, is creeping over him.
Yeah, growing to dread.
And this is powerful.
It is. It really is. And then we get the first mention of the lingering effects of the Witch King's blade, right? This whole idea that the wound had not been without effect, and this is the first time we see that.
Is this dread one of those effects? I mean, I know we're going to see some other very clear effects of the blade, but
that's a very good point. In other words, yeah, the
we know fear is the weapon of the Nazgul, right?
Right.
Is Frodo feeling this dread more acutely because of the effect of the Witch King's blade? There's a little bit of that. I don't know.
There's certainly an implication of that. Yeah. I mean, right after it, right? The deep uneasiness, growing to dread, creeps over him. Though he'd been healed, the wound hadn't been without effect. Now, sure, after that is when we get the effects. But I got to say that the dread, I wouldn't be surprised if that's an effect.
Certainly sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. It certainly must have some sort of dread enhancement, dread +2 or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here we get some positive changes. I'm not going to call any effects of the Witch King's wound positive, but beneficial, right?
It works out okay. Yeah, it helps.
There are some things that can help him from time to time. The fact that his senses are sharper, he can see things that normally couldn't be seen. But really, that's the only net positive, if you have it. That's the only benefit, because the only other thing that's listed is now the bearer of the ring. He has this incredibly heavy weight.
I think there are actually two very similar senses that he's getting here. I think he's got, he can perceive the unseen, sort of like a spider sense maybe. And then he can also see better in the dark, right?
Oh, yeah. I see what you're talking about. More aware of things. Yeah, you're right.
I think it's two different things.
I think you're right.
Still not much of a net positive in the long run, but
no, slightly beneficial here in the middle of the dark, but yeah.
Yeah. But the next thing we get, as you said, is this heavy weight of the ring, just hanging on his breast.
Yeah.
And there's something very, very despairing about, he feels the certainty of evil ahead and evil following.
Boy, between a rock and a hard place here, huh?
Yeah.
No matter what we do, stop and evil catches us, keep going, and we run headlong into the evil. Yeah.
Boy, that's very well said. Yeah. And it's just no escaping it.
No. We're going to face it one way or the other, so go forward, I guess. But yeah.
Evil to the front of me, evil to the back. Here I am, stuck in the middle
with Thu.
Stuck in the middle with Thu.
Oh, man. But he grips his sword, and I love this. He went on doggedly. And it's sort of that same, we've come back to that Beowulf concept.
That Germanic thing, isn't it?
Exactly. I'm going to do my duty. If evil's following me and it's chasing me to more evil, am I going to want to face the evil that's following me, or am I going to want to keep moving and face the evil that's coming up? And he's going to want to keep moving forward.
Yeah. I have to face the evil that's coming up.
Yeah. I'd rather face that evil that I'm going to come upon rather than stop and face the evil that's chasing. Yeah. Then we get this really cool description, this vivid description of the sounds of the company. You can really hear this, can't you? Isn't it? I mean, it's simple.
Yeah.
We're two words for each one: dull stomp, heavy tread, light step. maybe the
Well,
hobbits get a few more
it's
words.
such a vivid auditory passage. There's so much
is.
sensory information here. And again, the action does seem to slow down.
Mhm.
You can actually see a scene in some movie of Lord of the Rings that has not been made where you actually see a close-up on everybody's feet and you hear the sound of each member of the Fellowship's feet.
Yeah, you really do.
And yeah, there's just so much distinction between them, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. There really is. A little bit of alliteration, right? We get the firm footfalls. We get the soft, scarce
herd patter.
Light step Legolas.
Mm-hmm.
Halted and
yeah,
heard.
That's true.
We get a little bit of, a little bit of alliteration here and there.
Yeah, that's true.
Hmm.
Now, is Frodo hearing this? Is Frodo more acutely aware of these sounds because of the ring? Is this something else that his
another
senses...
another sensory improvement?
Yeah. But either the ring or maybe the lingering effects of the blade. The Witch King's blade.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking, not the ring, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought.
I mean, it doesn't really say that this is just Frodo's perception. It just says there was no sound but the sound of their own feet. Right. It doesn't really say for sure that we're in Frodo's point of view here.
That's true. I don't think it is, because now we're in the company's view, aren't we? The company behind him spoke seldom. Mm-hmm. No sound but the sound of their own feet.
Well, no, the company behind him. So
but
that's
their
Frodo
own
again.
feet. There was no sound but the sound of the company's feet. It was their own feet.
That's
so it's
true.
The company plural.
That's true.
Because if it was Frodo's view... I hear what you're saying, that the company behind him does still leave us in Frodo's view. You're right there. Mm-hmm. But then there was no sound but the sound of their own feet.
Because
if it was Frodo,
if
it was his view, it would say there was no sound but the sound of the company's feet.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. I could kind of go either way on this one. I don't know that it's definitive, because then we do get to Frodo began to hear, or imagine that he heard.
Yeah.
It's a hard call.
That is a hard call.
Either way, I think I kind of like it not being enhanced by the ring or by the wound, because it kind of makes this scene so much more powerful if it's just so quiet.
I think that is exactly what we're supposed to hear. Is right. Yeah. All we hear is the footfalls. Mm-hmm.
I think Absolutely. That's it. So,
but then Frodo does hear something, and this may be enhanced either by the ring or the Witch King's blade. And what does he hear here?
That's right. Ooh. The faint fall of soft, bare feet.
Yeah.
And he's not totally sure that he hears it.
No.
But once it starts, it doesn't stop. And then he realized that it's not an echo. Yeah. Because when they stop moving, it keeps going for a little while.
Just a little bit.
Oh, that's so creepy.
It is. And of course, anybody who's read the story or even knows of the story knows that this is, of course, Gollum.
Of course.
But in Unfinished Tales, we learn some details about this. We learn it for certain. And we find out that after his escape, now that's the escape from the elven quote-unquote jail, the one that Legolas traveled all the way to Rivendell to tell us about. Guys, we kind of let him go. Sorry. Anyway, so after his escape, he's being hunted by the elves.
He just wanted to go get some yard time. He said he just wanted to lift some weights, and we let him out there.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want him to get... We figured that letting him out in the fresh air would help him rehabilitate. We didn't... Our recidivism rate was, something we're really concerned about. Except it's not. These are elves.
Nope.
But anyway, so after his escape, he's being hunted by the elves. He hides in Moria. And then we get this. What then happened to Gollum cannot, of course, be known for certain. He was peculiarly fitted to survive in such straits, though at the cost of great misery. But he was in great peril of discovery by the servants of Sauron that lurked in Moria, especially since such bare necessity of food as he must have, he could only get by thieving dangerously. No doubt he had intended to use Moria simply as a secret passage westward, his purpose being to find Shire himself as quickly as he could. But he became lost, and it was a very long time before he found his way about. It thus seems probable that he had not long made his way towards the west gate when the 9 walkers arrived. He knew nothing, of course, about the action of the doors. To him they would seem huge and immovable, and though they had no lock or bar, and opened outwards to a thrust, he did not discover that. In any case, he was now far away from any source of food, for the orcs were mostly in the east end of Moria, and was become weak and desperate, so that even if he had known all about the doors, he still could not have thrust them open. It was thus a piece of singular good fortune for Gollum that the 9 walkers arrived when they did.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were talking a few episodes ago about how it was Spabimi that the Fellowship went through Moria.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about the fact that, Gandalf falls and he comes back as Gandalf 2.0 and everything. And that becomes a key element in the subsequent War of the Ring.
Mm-hmm.
This is another really
yeah.
big Spabimi, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
That they go through Moria and Gollum ends up, it ends up being good fortune for Gollum because otherwise he would have starved to death.
Right.
But it ends up being good fortune for everybody
Exactly.
because Gollum ends up following them, and
we all know what happens at the very end, right?
We all know what happens then. Yeah, exactly. So pretty amazing. If Gollum had starved to death here in Moria, would Frodo and Sam ever have made it to Mount Doom?
Yeah. And had they made it to Mount Doom and Frodo claimed the ring for his own, what would have happened then?
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing stuff.
Really amazing stuff. But then there's a fork in the road, and that's where I'm going to have you pick up.
All right. It was after nightfall when they had entered the mines. They had been going for several hours with only brief halts when Gandalf came to his first serious check. Before him stood a wide, dark arch opening into 3 passages. All led in the same general direction, eastwards, but the left-hand passage plunged down, while the right hand climbed up, and the middle way seemed to run on, smooth and level, but very narrow.
I have no memory of this place at all, said Gandalf,
standing uncertainly under the arch. He held up his staff in the hope of finding some marks or inscription that might help his choice, but nothing of the kind was to be seen.
I am too weary to decide,
he said, shaking his head.
And I expect that you are all as weary as I am, or wearier. We had better halt here for what is left of the night. You know what I mean. In here it is ever dark, but outside the late moon is riding westward, and the middle night has passed.
Poor old Bill, said Sam.
I wonder where he is. I hope those wolves haven't got him yet.
To the left of the great arch, they found a stone door. It was half closed, but swung back easily to a gentle thrust. Beyond, there seemed to lie a wide chamber cut in the rock.
Steady, steady, cried Gandalf,
as Merry and Pippin pushed forward, glad to find a place where they could rest with at least more feeling of shelter than in the open passage.
Steady! You do not know what is inside yet. I will go first.
That's probably a good thing he goes first, as we'll find out. But let's go back to the beginning of that. So sometime in the middle of the night, several hours after they entered, so probably somewhere between, I don't know, maybe midnight and 2 a.m., maybe? I don't know. We'll find out a little bit more about the miles that they've been going. They come to this big opening with 3 passages. They all had the same direction, but you got one up, one down, and one straight ahead. Interesting conundrum.
Which doesn't make it confusing at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. Good thing Gandalf has been here before, but guess what? He doesn't remember the place at all.
Right.
And he realizes very wisely, I think, that they're really all too tired to make a decision right now.
Absolutely.
So let's halt here for the night, or what's left of it, because it is pretty late or very early in the morning.
Right.
Everybody's hangry and they're ready for a break.
Gandalf needs a Snickers.
Yeah, you're not yourself when you're hungry.
Exactly. So Hammond and Skull point out that one of Tolkien's early chronologies says that the company had traveled 15 miles to get to this point since entering Moria earlier that night. And we're going to get on about pace later, but if they're at that same pace that we'll get to discussing at a later point, they've been going for about 5 hours to make that 15 miles. Now, the moon was shining, but this was January. So really, it could have been as early as 6, maybe 7 o'clock when they were at the door. But then you count the incident at the doors, the meal before they begin their march. I think it's fair to say it's at least midnight, probably a little bit later than that. But, it's not going to be like 4 in the morning at this point, not if they've only gone 15 miles. If that's the distance they've still gone. Obviously, that early chronology is no longer directly applicable, but it's good to know that Tolkien had that in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Poor Sam, thinking about Bill.
Of course.
I hope the wolves haven't got him yet. It's kind of a grim thought. Yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
So then they find the guard room. Merry and Pippin, of course, push to the front. They're a little anxious because now they are in a place where, they can rest. They don't feel like they're in this, open passage that's just where they're completely vulnerable. But Gandalf tells them to wait, and we then see why, don't we?
Yeah, well, wouldn't you know it? Great big hole in the floor. So that was a close one.
Gandalf, roll a d20 for me. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Aragorn wisely points out, you guys might have fallen in and still be wondering when you were going to strike the bottom. Like, that's how deep.
That's a terrifying thought, by the way. To fall so far that you realize I'm falling. Oh my goodness, I'm still falling. I have no idea when I'm going to hit the bottom.
I am still
What is this
falling.
wide, round thing that is coming up to meet me? It's so round. I shall call it the ground. I wonder if it will be friends.
There you go. Yep.
Sorry. For those of you who didn't quite recognize the reference, that's from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy after the improbability drive in the Heart of Gold generated a bowl of petunias and a sperm whale above the surface of a planet. Yeah. Those are the thoughts of the whale as it plummeted to the Earth planet.
I think anyone who's ever listened to this show has heard us make that reference before. So
quite probably. Yeah.
It is a classic moment from that book.
It is. It really is. No doubt.
And Aragorn gives some of the best advice ever. Let the guide go first while you have one.
Mm-hmm.
But let's point out.
While you have one. There's another one of those things you mentioned earlier. The idea that there's this kind of foreboding nature to the comment.
Once again, Aragorn has a bad feeling about all of this. And he thinks Gandalf is not going to be around much longer.
That's no moon. Yeah. He does have a bad feeling about this.
It's kind of the territory we're in right now.
It really is, yeah. And then Gimli, of course, gives us a nice little technical detail, a little story filler for us to understand why this room is what it is. He explains, look, this is probably a guard room made for watching these three passages because we're at a pretty major junction here in this main route. And the hole was, of course, a well, which, the lid's broken, so we need to be careful.
Right.
Though why you wouldn't build a little parapet around the well in the first place, I don't know. Instead of just making it
maybe because they're dwarves and they don't need those kinds of things. I don't know.
Maybe.
I get the sense that dwarves are just so sure-footed.
Yeah, maybe
in a place like this.
That's true. In a place like this, certainly. Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after that, and we're going to see how Pippin's curiosity gets him in a little bit of trouble. Now, I think it might be the first time we've seen something like this, but it certainly won't be the last. So I'm going to read.
Not at all.
Pippin felt curiously attracted by the well, while the others were unrolling blankets and making beds against the walls of the chamber, as far as possible from the hole in the floor. He crept to the edge and peered over. A chill air seemed to strike his face, rising from invisible depths. Moved by a sudden impulse, he groped for a loose stone and let it drop. What is with impulse control and stones with this group?
I'm telling you, man.
Throwing
just
a rock.
Like Boromir. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Boy, you're not kidding. It's impulse control again.
Yeah. Another kindergarten report card is coming home.
Seriously, yeah. We're going to get,
practice better impulse control.
Mm-hmm. We need to work on this, parents. He felt his heart beat many times before there was any sound. Then, far below, as if the stone had fallen into deep water in some cavernous place, there came a plunk, very distant, but magnified and repeated in the hollow shaft. "What's that?" cried Gandalf. He was relieved when Pippin confessed what he had done, but he was angry, and Pippin could see his eye glinting. "Fool of a Took," he growled. "This is a serious journey, not a hobbit walking party. Throw yourself in next time, then you'll be no further nuisance. Now be quiet." Nothing more was heard for several minutes, but then there came out of the depths faint knocks. Tom, tap, tap, tom. They stopped, and when the echoes had died away, they were repeated. Tap, tom, tom, tap, 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 tom. They sounded disquietingly like signals of some sort, but after a while the knocking died away and was not heard again. "That was the sound of a hammer, or I've never heard one," said Gimli. "Yes," said Gandalf, "and I do not like it. It may have nothing to do with Peregrine's foolish stone, but probably something has been disturbed that would have been better left quiet. Pray do nothing of the kind again. Let us hope we shall get some rest without further trouble. You, Pippin, can go on the first watch as a reward," he growled, as he rolled himself in a blanket. Yeah.
Oh, Pippin.
Oh, Pippin, Pippin, Pippin.
As you said, yeah, this is not the last time we're going to see Pippin do something like this.
Mm-hmm.
He gets near the edge of the hole.
Yep.
Looks over.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this hole?
Seriously.
Man,
It's
that's
like
a nice well.
magnet. It just draws.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really nice well. I like that well.
That's a nice well.
That's a nice
You got
well.
a nice well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lets the stone drop.
Lets
and
the stone drop.
many times.
Takes
Now,
a very long
I wonder
time to fall.
what's the resting heart rate of a typical hobbit? It's smaller than a human, so it must be a higher heart rate, I would guess.
That would make sense, yeah.
But either way, we're talking at least 2 or 3 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
probably more. Has felt his heartbeat many times. It's a long way to fall.
And then you get this very wonderful onomatopoeic plunk.
Mm-hmm.
Far,
Distant
far
and
below.
magnified and repeated.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
You can hear it really in your head. It's this magnificent sound just coming up, rolling up,
Yeah.
echo after echo after echo. Yeah.
And Gandalf kind of freaks out at first, doesn't he? Like he's
Oh, yeah.
scared for a moment.
Of course. I mean, this is a pretty silent place. Earlier, we just heard there was no sound but the sound of their footfalls. And now we get this. So,
Mhm.
when he finds out what happened, well, okay, he's a little bit relieved, but he's angry. And even Pippin knows it this time. And Gandalf, of course, not surprisingly, as we've heard one of the more famous lines, fool of a took.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly not the last time he's going to call him a fool either.
Right. And then, this the knocking
Tap,
of the
tap,
hammer.
tap.
And again, some another bit of wonderful onomatopoeia.
I know, isn't it?
Tom tap, tap tom, tap tom, tom tap.
Yeah.
The text tells us it sounds like a signal.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does.
Yeah. This isn't
And
just
this is
some
not good,
random
folks.
sound.
Yeah, this is not good.
No, it's not.
And yet Gandalf he's not losing it.
No.
He's calm.
I think he realizes it's far enough away that the odds of them knowing exactly where this came
Exactly
from,
where they are.
Yeah, this can't be the only place where a hole from the top comes
Right.
through. Yeah, there's going
Right.
to be lots and lots of other wells, and there are going to be other places where maybe it goes, through another place at a different level.
Sure.
But
But still, this was a bad idea, Pippin. This was a very bad idea.
And as a reward, he gets first watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're going to stay away. And now we get this, by the way, in the next paragraph that we stopped reading. Now he's afraid. Why couldn't he have been afraid earlier is what I want to know.
Yeah, I know, right? It would have been nice if he had a little bit of that caution earlier on.
Everybody else is making beds against the walls as far as possible from the hole.
Mm-hmm. And I'm noticing how much this has in common and also kind of has different from the later incident that everybody can remember where Pippin does something impulsive and a very bad idea, which is the incident with the Palantir later on in Two Towers.
Uh-huh.
I mean, once again, you got curious hobbit making a bad choice.
Right.
You got the wizard being angry, but then really quickly kind of turning, being kind to him,
Yeah.
Because here we see Gandalf, he shouts at him, and then he gets over it, and then he says, look, just don't do it again. Pray, do nothing of the kind again. That's a pretty kind, pretty gentle admonition at that point.
Yeah, I think so.
So, I don't know. I think it does sort of foreshadow the later incident with the Palantir. If nothing else, when Pippin does it later with the Palantir, it shouldn't be a surprise because Pippin does this kind of thing.
As well as even Gandalf's reaction in terms of the immediate reaction of, wow, that was a stupid thing to do. But then it's, concern for Pippin. Because here we are just, an hour later, he comes over and he's very kind. And the text tells us, he says this in a kindly tone, go ahead and go to sleep. Look, I can't sleep. I'll watch. Don't you worry about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, really like that.
Exactly.
But then he realizes
relieves him of his watch,
right?
and then he realizes what he really needs.
Yeah. I think he needed a Snickers bar earlier, right? We said he was hangry. But that's not what he gets. He actually gets a smoke.
He needs a smoke.
Yeah, that's right.
I need smoke.
And Pippin sees that wonderful image. You can just see that in your mind, this shadow sort of Gandalf huddled on the floor.
Yeah.
He's got a little light source, a glowing chip in his hands between his knees. Oh, what a moment that is.
That is a cool image. That's a very Gandalf-y image. It reminds
is.
me a little bit of the image from early in The Hobbit. He's sitting with the smoke is surrounding his head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the rings, all around.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, after everybody rests, we've got another march. And Sean, I'm going to go ahead and have you take us through that march.
Sure thing. It was Gandalf who roused them all from sleep. He had sat and watched all alone for about 6 hours, and had let the others rest.
And in the watches I've made up my mind, he said. I do not like the feel of the middle way, and I do not like the smell of the left-hand way. There is foul air down there, or I am no guide. I shall take the right-hand passage. It is time we began to climb up again.
For 8 dark hours, not counting 2 brief halts, they marched on, and they met no danger, and heard nothing, and saw nothing but the faint gleam of the wizard's light, bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp in front of them. The passage they had chosen wound steadily upwards. As far as they could judge, it went in great mounting curves, and as it rose it grew loftier and wider. There were now no openings to other galleries or tunnels on either side, and the floor was level and sound, without pits or cracks. Evidently they had struck what once had been an important road, and they went forward quicker than they had done on their first march. In this way they advanced some 15 miles, measured in a direct line east, though they must have actually walked 20 miles or more. As the road climbed upwards, Frodo's spirits rose a little, but he still felt oppressed, and still at times he heard, or thought he heard, away behind the company and beyond the fall and patter of their feet, a following footstep that was not an echo.
Okay, the footstep's still there. That's fun.
Yeah, that's comforting.
Yeah. Well, at least we have the following, at least we have the footstep following us. We can't be totally lost. Somebody's got to know where we are. There are footsteps behind us.
Let's just wait and ask him.
Right. You know the way out, don't you? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, just follow me. 1 left, precious. 2 right. 3. No, go back. Go back.
Oh, goodness. Wouldn't it have been interesting to have them meet Gollum this early in the story?
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Boromir would have killed him.
Yeah, Boromir would have killed him. You're absolutely right. Legolas might have too, just because, we don't want this embarrassment.
Dude, you made me look bad.
Right. You made our whole Wood Elves people look bad. So we're just going to eliminate this problem right here. That's actually why Thranduil sent him as an assassin, to find and kill Gollum, to restore their reputation as the best jailers in Middle-earth.
Our entire penal system is a joke.
You must kill him now. All right. Gandalf wakes them after he watched for 6 hours while they slept. So figure, I don't know, what time do we figure it must be? 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning at this point?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Something like that.
We're thinking
maybe a little early, maybe
before,
7.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's made up his mind, right? It's very subjective. I don't like the feel of the middle way.
Very, yeah.
There's foul air down below. What's the line from the movie? When in doubt, Meriadoc, follow your nose.
Follow your nose, yeah.
Which I always hear in my mind, it always knows, and I start hearing the jingle for Fruit Loops, every time I hear that scene.
Wow. That's
follow your nose,
amazing.
It always knows. You seriously don't remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally get it now. I never thought about it before.
Now you'll never be able to unhear it.
I certainly will again. Yeah, totally.
It always
That's
knows.
Great.
Yeah. Gandalf even sounds a little bit like Toucan Sam there at that moment. But anyway.
Yep.
So we go right and up. And I suppose really, if you have to choose between down, level, and up, up's probably your best bet. You're more likely to get to fresh air. You're more likely to get to maybe some windows and some light. So not a bad idea.
I mean, that sounds logical. That sounds like a good methodical way of making the decision. Because otherwise, I'm thinking, is this memory? Is this intuition? Is this Hand of Iluvatar making sure they find the right way? Or is this just a plain 33% chance?
Right, which is better than the 11% chance of Frodo being grabbed by the Watcher.
Right, right.
Yeah, I can see Gandalf in the middle of the night. Everybody's asleep. Everybody's asleep. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Right.
Catch a Balrog by the wing. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Because, it does seem like a completely arbitrary decision.
It does, doesn't it?
That
Totally
he really is just like, Iluvatar take the wheel. But but when you put it the way you did, I mean, it does make sense to go up.
Yeah. Yeah, there is some logic there, but it's not mentioned that was actually used in the analysis here. But maybe. Either way, they end up with another long march. It ends up being 8 hours plus some brief halts, so maybe 9 or 10 hours in total. This is after having been up until possibly 2 in the morning and sleeping for just 6 hours. So they've got to be wiped, especially with, none of these roads, well, not none, but most of these roads are not level. They're going up or they're going down.
Yeah.
These are hard paths to navigate. doing it in the dark, doing it while they're chased. They're scared, probably hungry, certainly thirsty. We know they didn't have a lot of water. They were almost out of Miravor. This is not a pleasant trip, but
not one bit.
It's an effective road that they're on. This is a main road of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
The text tells us that they walked 20 miles in those 8 hours, right? They advanced some,
making their way 15 miles as the crow flies.
20 or more. And this is for 8 dark hours. So they're pacing about 20 minutes per mile, which for those of you would mean the rest of the world. On the metric system, that's about 12 and a half minutes per kilometer. So it's a steady pace. It's not fast by any means. They're not, going to break the 5K record here or anything. But it is, a consistent pace, especially considering the environment.
Yeah. That's not bad. I mean, 3 miles in an hour is not bad.
Right. Absolutely.
And yet Frodo is continuing to feel oppressed.
Yes, he
and
is.
He's continuing to hear this ominous patter of Gollum's feet behind him.
Yeah, boy, that is... Well, like we said, he has that sense of evil following and evil ahead. Now we know a little bit more about the evil that's following.
Yep.
But they do eventually make their way to a great hall. And that's where I'm going to pick up. It's going to be the last bit of the chapter we read tonight, but that gives us an opportunity to pick up next week with a wonderful song from Gimli. But for now, let me read this. Gandalf seemed pleased. "I chose the right way," he said. "At last we are coming to the habitable parts, and I guess that we are not far now from the eastern side. But we are high up, a good deal higher than the Dimrill Gate, unless I am mistaken. From the feeling of the air, we must be in a wide hall. I will now risk a little real light." He raised his staff, and for a brief instant there was a blaze like a flash of lightning. Great shadows sprang up and fled, and for a second they saw a vast roof far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars hewn of stone. Before them, and on either side, stretched a huge empty hall. Its black walls, polished and smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. 3 other entrances they saw, dark black arches, one straight before them eastwards, and one on either side. Then the light went out. "That is all that I shall venture on for the present," said Gandalf. "There used to be great windows on the mountainside, and shafts leading out to the light in the upper reaches of the mines. I think we have reached them now, but it is night outside again, and we cannot tell until morning. If I am right, tomorrow we may actually see the morning peeping in. But in the meanwhile, we had better go no further. Let us rest if we can. Things have gone well so far, and the greater part of the dark road is over. But we are not through yet, and it is a long way down to the gates that open on the world." My, oh my.
So going back to the part that you didn't read, the paragraph immediately before that, we see that they basically marched as far as they can, or at least as far as the hobbits can. They're at the end of their endurance.
Yeah, they really are.
And suddenly they pass into this huge space.
Indeed. They do get in this space and they bunch together. I mean, this is a different feel. So they get together, they're a little anxious, but Gandalf is really pleased with himself, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. He's like, hey, I chose wisely. I chose the right way.
I'm seeing the Guardian
he's
from
as surprised as the rest
the
of them
last
are.
Indiana Jones movie, or the last good Indiana Jones movie. You have
He
chosen.
chose poorly.
Right, exactly.
You chose wisely.
Yeah.
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 And Gandalf is as shocked as anybody.
Of course.
He doesn't quite let on. He just seems pleased.
Yeah, you're right. Woohoo, I lucked out. But we are a little too high, he recognizes.
Yeah, too high. I mean, well, he does notice these are places people lived, so they're near the eastern side. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
but yes, too high.
Yeah.
And then what does he?
And then he, of course, risks some
here?
light, right? He risks a little bit of light so we can see the place. What a sight.
Yeah.
Oh,
little circle
man.
of light from Gandalf's staff.
Absolutely, a circle of light.
We don't know for sure that it's a circle, but I imagine it is a circle of light.
Well, I doubt it goes out in like a trapezoidal pattern.
He might have a fancy starburst pattern that it comes out in. You never know.
I'm thinking spherical.
I'm sure it's a
Simply
circle
spherical.
of light. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get Gandalf using his Magia here again to light things up a little bit. We see this flash like lightning, and then they see the place they're in. There's a vast roof. There's these pillars hewn of stone, these smooth, polished black walls.
Just gorgeous.
And 3 more entrances and or exits.
That's right. And it's night outside. Now, that's interesting. They've been going for 8 hours. So if they slept for only 6 and it's dark already, so let's think backwards. It's night outside, but given the time of year, that could be as early as, well, and given the latitude, it could be as early as 4:30 or 5.
Somewhere in the north, and this is winter, right? So
Right. It's January. It's mid-January. So 4:30, 5 o'clock would be the earliest that it could be dark. Let's call it 5 o'clock. It's been 8 hours. That means they started at 9.
Potentially earlier. We just don't know how far north this is. But yeah, I think, 4:35 is probably a safe bet.
Yeah. I'm somewhere between 4:30 and 5. But didn't we find out that the Shire was sort of at England in terms of latitude? And so now they're a little further south than that. So this is like maybe France or, northern Italy or something along those lines in terms of, similar latitude.
Yeah.
Again, I know we're trying to make real world comparisons, and I know that that's not something we necessarily should do, but it's fun to do anyway. But yeah, let's assume that, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening, they've marched for 8 hours plus brief halts. So maybe it's closer to 9 hours. If that's the case, then we're looking at the fact that they would have started at 8 a.m. Where they were before. It was dark, even though it was light outside because they were further down the mountain.
Right, true.
That makes sense. If they'd slept for only 6 hours and they started at 8 a.m., then they were up until 2 in the morning the night before. So that makes sense. That works.
Yeah.
So it's only just now dark. It's a shame they didn't get there sooner. But if they rest now, they'll get some light in the morning.
That's right. We may get some light in the morning, and that's a nice little image, nice little thought, nice little bit of hope.
Yeah. I think so. Light is always symbolic.
We might get to see some morning light in the morning.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and rest while we can, but we're not through yet, are we?
No, we're not. And folks, the greater part of the dark road is indeed over. But as Gandalf said, we're not through yet. We've got Bartleman's Bag coming your way in just a minute. And even when that's done, the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony.
Yes, indeed. We've always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you will find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
And now we have another common room over on Reddit. You can find some really great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. As always, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at the handle @PrancingPonyPod. So follow us wherever you might be. And if you like us, please share us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, anywhere you can find Tolkien fans.
And if you really want to let the world know your feelings about us, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews we have, the more visible our podcast is. That helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we've built together.
And finally, if you'd like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and even more, check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to find out how you can join the fellowship of the podcast. Now, I think it's time to see what old Bartleman has in the mailbag for us. Sean.
All right, well, we've got a couple of quick ones tonight. Both of these come from Sam D. in Texas. First, Sam asks, in the discussion on the Council of Elrond, you pointed out that the members were called, seemingly by Providence, and that Saruman was not there, despite being a member of the White Council. Does this suggest Saruman was denied the calling? If his absence was eventually revealed to be malicious, could this have been a way of creating suspense regarding Galadriel? As in, later on when we meet her, are we supposed to fear that she may be in league with Saruman? This would make her rejection of the ring all the more profound to us readers. Alan, what say you?
Well, let's remember the discussion briefly. We discussed how everybody who was at the council was not summoned to Rivendell by Elrond to attend a council meeting. They were all on their own errands, right? Legolas was bringing the news of Gollum's unfortunate escape. Boromir seeking the answer.
Can't leave that one alone today, can we?
No, we can't. And everybody had their own purpose for being there. It's by providence that they were all there at the same time. So does Saruman's absence imply that Iluvatar knew better than to arrange to get him there? Well, yeah, of course Iluvatar knew better. Even Gandalf knew Saruman was a traitor at that point because he just, escaped from Orthanc. So the same providence that arranged for Legolas, Boromir, Gimli, Gandalf, and the hobbits all to be there at the same time arranged for Saruman not to be there, and also arranged for Gandalf to find out about Saruman's treachery early enough to make sure they didn't do a direct manual summons to him to bring him to the council.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
All right, so what about this other question about Galadriel and the impact that all this has on our perception of her later on?
That's an interesting question. Galadriel isn't even mentioned here. We discussed that maybe because Tolkien didn't invent her until later. So it may not be as much a question of what does the news of Saruman make us think about Galadriel, whom we haven't heard of yet, as much as it is a question of when we meet Galadriel later on, what are we supposed to think about her? Yeah, Tolkien does leave us wondering about Galadriel even before we meet her. When the Fellowship gets near to Lothlorien, we get that wonderful exchange between Boromir and Aragorn, in which Boromir expresses his fear of the Golden Wood. I think we're meant to be a little suspicious or a little fearful about Galadriel, at least uncertain. Now, that uncertainty exists right up until the moment she passes the test and will go into the West and remain Galadriel. We realize at that point in hindsight that even she was uncertain of her own trustworthiness. It's really is a powerful moment.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. But now how much of that uncertainty about whether Galadriel can be trusted comes from the knowledge that others like Saruman have already betrayed them, or fear that she might actually be in league with Saruman? How much simply comes from the language of the passages in question, like the exchange between Boromir and Aragorn? Mm-hmm. Well, the truth is, by the time we meet her as first-time readers, we don't know anything about the White Council. We don't know anything to suggest that Galadriel even has Saruman in her contacts list. So I tend to think that most of the uncertainty comes from those later passages and from the sort of the isolated nature of the Golden Wood, the fact that they don't interact with others, the way, Rivendell is known as a place of lore, right? I mean, Denethor sends Boromir to Imladris because it's known.
Right.
Nobody
sends anybody to
Lothlorien
for counsel. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's got a lot to do with it. I don't think there's any indication that she might actually be in league with Saruman.
I agree with that. I think it's a really interesting question, but I don't really see too much. As a first-time reader, you don't really see much of anything to connect the two of them, even later on when we meet her. No. So, for a reader who is approaching this for the first time and doesn't know whether she's going to betray them or not, there's just nothing to connect her to Saruman at all. We have reasons to believe, like the Rohirrim might be in league with Saruman. The text actually tells us that might be a possibility, but there's nothing in the text to tell us that anyone is thinking Galadriel might be. So I think I tend to agree with you, Alan, but it is a really fun question, and I have to say thanks for that, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've got one more from Sam here. He also said, regarding our dear friend Butterbur.
Ah, yes, Barnum.
It is unfortunate that he is assigned the epithet fat, and a cursory search into the etymology of the word doesn't suggest much more meaning than the obvious. However, since the word has also been used to mean a privileged and rich person, perhaps Aragorn intends it endearingly for him? We have already seen that he appreciates the simpleness of the Bree-folk. Maybe he's reinforcing Butterbur's success in his community.
I don't know. I want to ask you what you think, but my first comment is just looking at the context of Aragorn's statement.
Yeah.
It makes me think, no, it's not a positive reference when he calls him that.
No.
At least at the time. But you've got some stuff on the etymology and some of the history of that. Yeah. So let's get your insight on this one, Sean.
It is a nice thought. We really don't want to think of Aragorn as fat-shaming Barlaman.
No.
So I definitely like the thought, and I would love to find a way to absolve Aragorn here if we can.
Would be nice, right?
I'm just not sure we can, but let's take a look. So, looking at the Oxford English Dictionary, it appears that the earliest senses of the word fat were primarily used to describe animals. So the OED gives us a citation of fat meaning well-fed or plump pretty early on, around 893 in Old English. That was in reference to animals. And then more specifically, in reference to certain animals that are fed up for slaughter or ready to be killed, that starts appearing around 1000. Now, these are both arguably positive senses, at least from the perspective of the farmer. A well-fed animal is a good thing for you to have.
Of course.
And it's specifically describing them as well-fed as opposed to obese. But again, this is all specific to animals. It's not too long before the word fat starts to be used in a derogatory sense, too. There's an Old English riddle in the Exeter book, which includes a reference to, this is interesting, there's a reference to all of creation. Creation's the answer to the riddle. And there's a reference to it being fatter than a fattened swine. Now, the OED lists this as a derogatory sense. I don't really know that I understand why that is, but that's what the OED says, so they're listing this as a derogatory sense.
Okay.
The first reference in the OED to a person being fat in a derogatory sense is in Middle English, around 1400. We don't really get positive senses of people being called fat that sounds anything like what Sam is thinking of, like this idea of a privileged and rich person. You really don't get that until a bit later. around 1526, we start seeing these figurative phrases like fat of my benefits or made fat with God that are more positive senses of that idea of fat.
Right. Interesting. It does make me think that we've talked in a Patreon special last year about the time, the kind of the anachronistic stuff about the Shire and how Bree is kind of stuck between the more like turn of the
stuck
century
between
stuff.
sort of the more medieval world and the more modern world.
Right. It's like a late Middle Ages sort of thing as opposed to, early medieval. So maybe since Bree is set in that later time, we get some positive meanings. But honestly, it's not looking good generally, is it?
It's really not. No, I mean, really the earliest senses of the word fat in regards to people really were speaking negatively about them.
Right.
And or I guess at the very least comparing them to well-fattened animals ready to be slaughtered. Neither one of those interpretations really absolves Aragorn very much.
No, none of those are good.
And you said this at the very beginning of our answer. When you look at the context, he's got statements like, Strider I am to one fat man who lives within a day's march of foes that would freeze his heart.
Right.
That's kind of a bitter statement. You can see that Strider's kind of angry about that. He really is. That really is a pretty negative sense in which he's using that. Now, I suppose you could argue that as much as we made a few jokes about body shaming Barliman, I think the reality is maybe Aragorn is not so much judging Barliman on his weight as he is sort of comparing him to a dumb, well-fed farm animal. You can kind of see a little bit of that. He's sort of criticizing Barliman for having this naive understanding of the world and kind of doesn't realize how good he has it.
Right.
So maybe there's a bit of that there, but I don't really see that as endearing either.
No, I don't think so either.
I tend to think Occam's razor applies here. I think the simplest answer is the correct one. I think Aragorn's just calling Barliman fat, and he's using it in a derogatory way. He's not alone. Gandalf does the same thing. But I think it's important to stress that they're not doing it to make fun of him or to be juvenile, even though we made some jokes about that. I think the reality is they're judging him for being unreliable in a crisis.
Yep.
They're judging him for not being used to making the kinds of sacrifices that, people like them have to make, people like Gandalf and Aragorn have to make when they're in wartime.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit better than making fun of him, but I wouldn't say it's endearing either, the way Sam is looking for.
No, I don't think so. But Sam, it was a great question, actually, and so were both your questions tonight, so thank you very much. And folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Now, please be sure to join us again next week when Gimli breaks out a little dwarven karaoke.
Man, I don't know. That just seems a little disrespectful of dwarven history, I gotta say.
I admit, maybe. I mean, it's not very hard, really, though. The karaoke's straightforward. It's mostly just chanting anyway, so
that's true.
It's too hard to do. I'm going to be in so much trouble with the dwarves.
Better than our karaoke. You got to.
Well, that's a low bar.
Much better than our karaoke, you got to say.
No doubt about that. Well, folks, we want to thank each of you for listening as always, and we want to also give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. To May in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, and Joseph in Texas. Thank you all so very much.
And make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, and most of all, your maps of Moria to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
Boy, wouldn't those be handy?
Wouldn't they? Yeah.
Barliman's
send those
not
to
always
Gandalf, actually. That's
he could actually use one of those. Yeah. Barliman's not always punctual with the mail, but we'll get back, and he really won't be punctual with the mail after he's heard tonight's Barliman's bag.
No, that's for sure.
But we will get back to you as soon as we can, and your question or comment may be featured on an upcoming show.
Yeah, he's too busy trying to get to the gym now. Well, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.